Yeah, I know what a timely manner is. It's what my content isn't based on. Talk about a game when it's new and people care about it? Nah, I'm gonna wait till the hype dies down and no one cares any longer. Speaking of, Warhammer 40k Boltgun. This game is fun. Other people have reviewed it, covered it quite extensively, and it's not super hard to find out if this game is for you or not. Shout out to Bricky for covering this first, not because I'm gonna rip off the review, of course, although I'll be fully honest, my opinions line up pretty closely with his, but because one of his criticisms is probably the biggest one I have, which means I won't look like a complete moron when I bring it up. But to get to the point, why cover it here, you may ask? Because if I record footage of me playing Boltgun and make a video about it, it means I get to play more Boltgun. Which should tell you all you need to know about the end opinion here, but let's get into things because I want to tell you why you should own Boltgun if for some reason you don't. I hope you don't mind the word Boltgun because you're going to be hearing it a lot. Warhammer 40k Boltgun is a boomer shooter set in the 40k universe. You play as Malum Cato, a Black Templar who has been loaned to the Ultramarines for a bit. I can see no other reason for this man being as bloodthirsty as he is other than that. The story of this game is very simple, which is good because that means I don't need to waste people's time pretending they care about the story of a Doom clone. So, remember Captain Titus in the Space Marine video game? You're a 40k fan, who am I kidding? Of course you do. Well, since Chaos Corruption is harder to get rid of than most STDs, Forge World Graia is still a little bit corrupted. You and some other Ultramarines are sent to the planet by my favorite Warhammer character archetype, Mommy Tech Priestess. It's under the supervision of the Ordo Malleus, so the Inquisition is involved from the start this time, but all that really amounts to is you have a funny little servo skull they loaned you floating around that stays silent just long enough for you to forget it exists. You and some other Ultramarines are sent to investigate and deal with any issues you might find. Your battle brothers die in the crash, but since you're the player character, you're just a bit scraped up. There's health gets like 20 feet from the landing site, you'll be fine. After that, things get nice and simple. There are heretics on Forge World Graia. There should not be heretics on Forge World Graia. Fix this. Yeah, there's a reason I said he's a Black Templar painted like an Ultramarine. Captain Titus was for the most part very calm and collected, Sinonis was just an all-around bro, and Leandros was Leandros. But Malum Cato is Angron if he was a loyalist Primarch. It doesn't matter what he's fighting. Heretics, Chaos Space Marines, demons, all will die before him and his intense hatred of anything that had the audacity to be alive in his presence. Although he does pull out the Codex Astartes to read as an idle action if you sit there for long enough instead of wiping his ass with it, so maybe he is an Ultramarine at heart after all. That little detail lines up with one of the strengths of this game, its presentation. Everything is very 40k. Cato shouts taunts at the enemy thanks to the dedicated shit-talking button, which more games desperately need to add.
You will not live another day.
You find the Boltgun surrounded by a glowing golden light like the Emperor's directing you to it, the enemies all look spectacular, and every single step you make really drives home that Space Marines are tanks in the shape of human beings. The sprites of enemies are beautifully rendered, and every single weapon you find looks exactly like it should. You don't have armor like you do in most of these games, you have contempt. You are such a hateful bastard that it manifests as a shield against bullets. A whole lot of work went into making things look authentic to 40k, and it paid off in spades. The same can be said of the environment, although by the nature of the game it doesn't look quite as good. From a design standpoint it's damn near flawless, everything once again looks straight out of Warhammer. Huge gothic buildings infested with horrors from beyond time and space tower over you, I couldn't be happier. And it also succeeds very well in looking authentic to games from the early 3D era of gaming. What this means is that it looks like an early 3D game. It looks like shit. Now obviously this isn't a huge issue, I mean the game kicks ass and the feel of a shooter is a million times more important than how it looks. But if you're for some reason expecting Deathwing's hulking rooms with graphics rendered down to the text on scrolls, you'll be disappointed. The music also slaps. I don't have much to say on it, it's not the most memorable soundtrack in history, but it's still very good and exactly the kind of thing you need for this game. It makes me feel gooder when I'm killing demons and that's really all I can ask for. I also might not just have much more room to remember video game soundtracks with, since Rome Total War and the Halo OSTs already take up a good 90% of my mental processing power at any given moment. Now all this presentation stuff is well and good, but how about the gameplay? You know, the thing you give a damn about with a boomer shooter? Well, I don't know how to put this gently, so I'll just come out and say it. I'm at least half-mast every time I engage in combat. Allow me to show you why, featuring the Darktide soundtrack, since that's the best thing to come out of that game by a long shot. If Malum Cato was on Cadia, it wouldn't have fallen. There wouldn't have been a need for anyone else to be on Cadia for that matter. Just throw him at Abaddon and watch 10,000 years of traitorous progress vanish. I think the ultimate 40k game for me would be Kato and Shasla Kais from Fire Warrior fighting orcs, Tyranids, and Chaos together. They'd probably clean up the galaxy single-handedly. This game is a power fantasy to be sure, but the rarest kind of power fantasy game. One where you feel like a badass without the enemies feeling like pushovers. For example, most human enemies go down in a single hit to the bolter, 2 if they made sure to have their protein shake that day. For all of those who only think in terms of the bolter just being a strength 4 completely average weapon on the tabletop, this game remembers well that a Boltgun is kick-ass. The weapons even have strength stats on them to go along with the enemies having toughness scores, which is neat. As you find more weapons, the game does something equally impressive in that none of them feel like they're lesser than the other ones. The shotgun is the argument ender for anything that isn't wearing at least as much armor as you. The plasma gun is probably the most faithful to the tabletop weapons because whatever it hits is going to have a very bad day. And you know what? I've never been terribly interested in guns, but I desire the heavy bolter carnally. And to top it all off, it avoids the biggest pitfall these games have, which is not having enough ammo lying around for the fun things. I know why the BFG doesn't have ammo lying around everywhere. It's because Doom would be absolutely trivial if that was the case. But it's still disappointing. Boltgun, meanwhile, understands that when it gives you a meltagun, you want to use the meltagun more than once every half hour. And it provides. Ammo for pretty much every weapon is pretty easy to come by, especially if you're exploring around the maps a bit. And yet with all of that being said, the enemies aren't slouches either. Sure, you take down Chaos Space Marines at such a rate that the Black Legion is going to have to start putting up recruiting posters, and sure, every bullet that isn't coming out of your gun didn't have its morning coffee and is just kind of meandering through the air, but between the enemy variety and the amount of them, you'll be hard-pressed to survive in a good amount of the encounters you come across, especially as the game goes on. You might wonder how the regular human enemies are a threat if you just one-shot them with every weapon in the game, and then you focus just a bit too hard on getting rid of them and your health suddenly disappears from everything else taking potshots at you. Try to get up close and personal with some of the more melee-oriented Chaos Space Marines, and you're going to find out pretty quickly that you don't get higher up in the chaotic hierarchy if you haven't earned that position. And that's just scratching the surface. Almost every enemy in the game has some way to, in academic terms, lead to you getting face-fucked. You will learn to fear the average man with the plasma gun, because even if he doesn't outright kill you, he's going to be the start of your downfall half the time. The levels, meanwhile, are designed to facilitate maximum fun. Almost no fight is going to be in a completely flat room. Malum Kato is the single most athletic space marine in existence, because you can leap across rooms and vault all over the goddamn place to get better firing angles and avoid all the shots you can. I don't think I've had this much fun just moving in a game since Titanfall. To reward exploration, there's secrets all over the place, all of them designed to spike your dopamine levels when you pick them up. You can find one that refills your ammo and gives you more than you can usually carry, one that sends your DPS through the roof, and my favorite ones which temporarily give you specialty bolters. I don't really know what any of the ones you can find are in the lore, but they sure make me feel good when I fire them. You'll encounter both all the enemies and all weapons you'll find in the game by the end of the second chapter, but truthfully I don't mind this. Boltgun isn't the longest game in the world, so to me this means I have the last third of the game just really go ham at the enemies it's laid out, rather than once again have another weapon to figure out the best uses for, another enemy to try and figure out its strengths and weaknesses of. Besides, even by that point there's still a ton of enemies to brutally massacre, none of which feel redundant and all of which will keep you on your toes. Pink and blue horrors, plague toads of both the lesser and regular variety, all sorts of chaos Astartes from regular marines to champions to terminators. Even when they stop introducing new ones, you're not exactly short for variety. Said enemy variety also encourages you to really use everything you have, because some weapons are just better against certain enemies. The heavy bolter is great against everything, of course, but I found I especially preferred it when I was fighting Screamers of Tzeentch. Makes you feel like an anti-air gunner in World War II, with the thundering shots taking down those pesky flying bastards one at a time. The plasma gun is the go-to for Chaos Space Marines, especially the champion, since the heavy bolter slows you down when you fire it, and if these guys get too close, they're going to send you to the warp personally. The closest thing in the game to a weapon I wasn't a fan of was the grenade launcher at first. I thought it was one of those grenade launchers that always bounces and has a delayed fuse, and I am horrible with those things. Turns out I was just shit at aiming, because when you hit an enemy, it sticks into them and deals unbelievable damage. To top it off, it's a revolver grenade launcher. What more can you ask for than something like that? And if all else fails, your trusty bolt gun is never a bad choice. It's a bolt gun. The game is called Boltgun. Of course it's going to be a good weapon. Having as many weapons as this game does and not have any of them feel lesser than the others is a tremendous accomplishment that even the recent Doom games never managed, at least to me. I'm always on my toes, but I always feel like a badass space marine. Like I said, Boltgun is the kind of game that makes you feel powerful, but also keeps you engaged by not just toggling God mode. All of this applies to the hard difficulty, by the way. Halo has taught me that shooters with 4 difficulty options probably want you to pick the third one for the most fun. The first 2 tend to be too easy, and whatever the legendary equivalent is probably just going to make you want to put a hole in your screen. Although if you could do with an ego boost, you are canonically stronger than a Primarch if you play on the hardest difficulty setting. There's also no bugs. The closest thing I can think of to one is that when the pink screamers split into 2 blue screamers after you kill them, sometimes they don't spawn. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that's the game preventing bugs if the little spawner orb tries to put them in a place that could either get them stuck or glitch out of the map. This game also remembers something that I cannot celebrate enough. This setting is goofy and fun. Can 40k be serious? Of course it can. There's no major reason you can't have serious things in it. But my favorite kind of 40k is the Dawn of War kind, where everyone is screaming non-stop and there's goofy, hammy voice acting. Not when it's monologuing about how amazing and awesomely the Space Marines are written, and how the story of Grimbly-Blop, the Chaos Lord of the Celestial Skullfuckers, is actually really emotionally engaging, because you see he was briefly in the Horus Heresy talking about how the Emperor is kind of a dickhead, and that apparently counts as a complex character. Or when it's jerking itself off over how tragic and impressive the story is of the Primarchs who fell to chaos because their dad walked away for 5 minutes and they lacked basic common sense. In short, this game remembers that Space Marines aren't whiny teenagers in power armor. They're space crusaders fighting in the name of a god emperor, and everything that's different needs to be exploded. They should be yelling and flying around shooting everything in the face 110% of the time, not complaining about how Daddy Demigod doesn't love them enough. Okay, complain about the Horus Heresy and Space Marines in the game about a Space Marine. There's that off the Eldar fan checklist. I await the day I am finally banished from lore crimes for being an Eldar fan and constantly mentioning VTubers. I brought up Pippa, Sleepy, and Lumi in the last one. I'm gonna shoot for 4 next time. Go watch Lore Crimes, I'm in it, and so are 3 vastly more qualified people. Anyways, there's my plug. Back to video game. And my last point of praise for this game is specifically those moments where you're locked in a room and can't come out until everything is dead. These are the moments the game shines. The Serval Skull buddy says something along the lines of "commence purge," and you know the next 3 to 5 minutes are going to be a good time. All of your skills are put to the test, and every weapon you have is going to come out at least once as different enemies spawn in and do their best to take you out. Yeah, it's just more combat, but goddammit, these bits are so fun they're worth bringing up on their own. Screamers can be flying overhead while traitors and heretics lay into you with their own weaponry, and all will fall before Malam Cato and his fury that would impress Pellinal Whitestrake. There's no Eldar killing in this game, thankfully. I like those elves. I do have criticisms of this game, but to be clear, none of them are deal breakers in any way. With that being said, I would feel remiss if I didn't complain at least a little bit. For one, the enemies in this game have a solid 3 animations apiece. They're not exactly the most lively of fellas. I'm pretty sure the regular human enemies go from guns at their side to both hands in the air getting ready to fire without a single frame in between. No, most of the time this is just an aesthetics thing. Yeah, it'd be nice if they had more animations, but I'm not here to analyze every single frame of the 50 guys in a room actively trying to kill me. And most of what's there is usually pretty good at signaling what's about to happen to you, so it isn't detrimental to gameplay. When the plague toads stop moving and open their mouths, they're either going to vomit at you or try and lick you from across the room, which is a lot deadlier than it sounds. Either way, time to start strafing. But the Lord of Change. Oh, the Lord of fucking Change. If there was ever a time I used that word for emphasis in a video rather than just adding it in because I swear like a sailor, it's now. For the most part, he's not that bad. He's a boss, so obviously he's going to be a bit tricky to take on. But he has this really cool move I like to call Eat Shit, I Win, where he stands still for a quarter of a second, raises his hand by approximately 3.2 pixels, and then your health disappears into the night like you ripped ass at a bar in front of someone you're trying to hit on. I hate this attack on a spiritual level. You fight a Lord of Change as the first major boss as well before you get the Melt-A-Gun and can return the favor, and he's tanky enough that even the heavy bolter alone isn't enough to deal with him. It turns the game from a fast-paced action shooter to a cover shooter, which is the exact opposite of what I'm here for. Most of the time the lack of animations isn't much more than a small disappointment, but with him it is genuinely something that ruins the pacing of the game. Speaking of slowing down the pacing, please for the love of God, Boltgun devs, add a map. Yeah, this is the criticism I'm glad others have brought up, because before I just felt like a moron, but now at least other people are in the same boat. One of the first levels in the game takes place in a hive city, with massive towering spires looming above you. Debris and corpses litter the street, especially after you've gone through an area, and it's claustrophobic and hard to navigate on a first go. I killed everything in sight, then spent 15 minutes running around with the only sound being that of my footsteps echoing into the night. This was not fun. I was not having fun. I was thinking that I would like to be playing something else at that moment, and this isn't the only level. Sometimes things are just hard to navigate, and a map would solve it 90% of the time. I also hate key hunting, and you do a lot of that in this game. This all has the qualifier that I'm absolutely dogshit with directions in both real life and video games, but that being said, I'm here to shoot things, not try and find which corner of the map holds the sacred icon that allows me to progress forward. There should be no thought involved beyond which gun I want to use next. The downtime between combat in this game should be limited to walking through a hallway hoovering up health kits in contempt, not frustratedly looking for the blue key, which you need to find the red key first to access. Also, the chainsword is mid. It locks you in once you swing it at an enemy until you either stop chainsawing them or they're dead. It's fun early game, and even later on if you find a lone enemy that isn't melee based, you can take care of them pretty easily, but when you're balls deep in enemy territory, if you try and use that thing, then the enemy is going to be balls deep in you. Kinda disappointing, but the gunplay is so good I don't really care. I guess a power sword or thunder hammer would have been nice though. You know, something that makes the melee go a lot quicker or at least do more damage. That way it still would have had a use past the first 3 levels. That's still more useful than the dash move though. The chainsword already automatically dashes towards whatever enemy you're aiming at. The dash is just a dash, which in most games is useful, but aside from the little tutorial teaching you how to use it, I don't think I ever did unless I was forcing myself to here. You already move at the speed of light when you're sprinting, and sprinting is unlimited. I don't really feel the need to move at the speed of light +1. But at this point, I'm just nitpicking. If my biggest criticisms are I can't find keys and the melee in a shooter is kinda meh, then I'm playing a very fun game. And if you still aren't convinced you should get this game, let me give you the highest possible praise I can give it. I'm a Xeno player. I like orcs, I like Necrons, I love the Eldar. I don't particularly like the Imperium or Space Marines. I hate the constant releases of 50 new Space Marine Lieutenant models for every one remade Xeno model. This game makes me like Space Marines and the Imperium. I've never been more pleased to hear about how Heretics need purging than when I'm playing Boltgun, because this game remembers that Warhammer 40k can be fun. Thank you, as always, to my wonderful channel members. You are the Boltgun to my Boltgun, letting me Boltgun until the Boltgun has finished. Such is the power of Boltgun, I mean Nagash. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Ever wonder what they mean when a character looks at something chaotic and says it hurts their brain to even see? This is what they mean. This shit is headache central. Also apparently leads to excommunication, so best not to touch it.